So this is my TeamCity build server, and we can use TeamCity to build many different sorts of projects. So on here, for example, I have a build for a .NET project, I have a build for a Java project, but it'll let us run many different types of builds. So I'm going to use this to build our GitFlow project. That's a Java project. We're not going to concentrate on that. What we will look at though, and what we will concentrate on, is using Git to manage the sources and how we can use TeamCity to pull multiple branches from the server and build those branches at the same time. So we'll run through the steps here. We want to create a project, and we'll just call the project GitFlow. And we can give it a description. So I'll say Pluralsight GitFlow, and we'll click on create. And we'll save this. And then what we do inside TeamCity is create what's called a VCS route. And that VCS route will point at our version control system, which in this case is going to be Git, and it'll use that to pull the sources that we need to build the code for us. So that will be the first step here, to create that route. So to create the VCS route, we click on the button. We specify the type of VCS we want to use, which is going to be Git. We give the route a fetch URL. And that fetch URL is going to be our Git URL. And if I go back to GitHub here, it's the URL we specify as part of the SSH. So if I copy that and go back into TeamCity and paste that in, then that's going to be the URL we're going to use. In TeamCity, we also specify the push URL for any changes, and that's going to be the same URL. We need to give the route a name, so let's just call this GitFlow, and TeamCity generates an ID for me called GitFlow _ GitFlow in this case, which is project name, root name. Notice that we specify a default branch, and the default branch we're going to use here is just going to be master. We also specify some other information that the build server needs, such as checkout policy. So for example, what happens when we check out? Do we clean the files first and do a clean checkout? And also some information for Git, for example, the type of authentication we're using and where the key lives and where Git lives, so where the server can find the Git commands. Then once we have that, we have our VCS route in place, and we can then use this to do a build. So after adding the VCS route, I've also added what's known as a build configuration inside TeamCity. And a given project can have multiple configurations. You might have configurations to do continuous integration. You might have configurations to do overnight builds. You might have configurations to look at specific parts of the project and only build those parts of the project. Configuration is associated with the VCS route, which in this case will be our Git route, the GitFlow route. And it'll also have a set of build steps. If I take a look at the configuration, we can see that the version control settings, it's using the GitFlow VCS route we set up. The build step is using Gradle, which if you're a Java guy, you know the Gradle is like a make type tool for Java. If you've not done any Java programming, don't worry, we don't really care what Gradle is in this case. And we have a trigger. And in this case, we have what's known as a VCS trigger. So when somebody changes something inside our source control, that trigger fires and it will fire the build. So if you remember, if I go back and look at my version control settings, we see that currently this is referencing the master branch. So any changes to the master branch will be detected automatically by TeamCity and will kick off a build. So I'm going to do something very naughty here. I'm going to edit code on the master branch directly. So we're in Dan's directory. Dan has checked out the master branch. There's no changes on here. And inside the code here, I'm not going to be too naughty. I'm just going to add a comment into here. And once I've added this comment, I can save the file, flip back to my command prompt and do a git status. We know the changes are there. I can do a git commit -am and say added comment, and then do a git push. So when I do the push, we push the changes to the server. Go back to TeamCity and we sit on the projects page here. We see that the build starts. So TeamCity is monitoring the Git repository, it's finding changes to master, and then it's doing the work to run the build. And the build is fairly quick, it just takes a few seconds in this case. We're not doing too much work inside this build. And eventually this build will succeed, it'll be green. There we go, so the build is now completed. However, we're only monitoring the master branch at the moment.